March 10, 1945. 2 a.m., Nyanbashi District, Tokyo. The emergency coordinator's pencil trembled violently as he tried to record an entry in the district logbook, words that would haunt survivors for decades. The rain is burning. The air itself has turned to fire. Through the shelter window he saw something that shattered 4 years of Japanese military propaganda. Glowing embers drifted down from American B-29s like fiery snowflakes, each ember erupting into spreading pools of molten flame that streamed along streets, climbed building walls, and jumped from structure to structure with terrifying persistence. The napalm-filled M69 incendiaries were generating heat near 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to boil canal water and create their own localized weather patterns. In the Shitamachi Quarter, home to more than 1 million residents living in tightly packed wooden and paper dwellings at 103,000 people per square mile, the Americans had just begun what would become the deadliest air raid in human history. 279 Boeing B-29 Superfortresses, out of 325 that took off, had been stripped of almost all defensive guns to carry the maximum bomb load. They were releasing 1,665 tons of firebombs containing 500,000 individual M69 bomblets across a 3 by 4 mile rectangle of Tokyo. Japan's citizens had been repeatedly assured their capital was unreachable. Even if U.S. bombers somehow arrived, they were told Tokyo's firefighters could manage any disaster. None realized that this moment would shatter the nation's deepest beliefs about American limits, Japanese invulnerability, and the very definition of modern warfare. Japan's collapse was being spelled out not through distant island battles, but in rivers of burning fuel running through its capital, in temperatures that reduced entire families to ash in seconds, and in the output figures of U.S. factories, which soon made clear that the Japanese war effort was hopeless. The real unraveling had started months earlier, long before most Japanese understood. By late 1944, the B-29 Superfortress was operating from the recently captured Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, seized in brutal fighting that summer. These islands, just 1,500 miles from Tokyo, finally placed the Japanese homeland within reach of America's most advanced bomber. Major General Curtis LeMay, who took command of the 21st Bomber Command on January 20, 1945, prepared for what was coming. A veteran of the European air campaign, he inherited a failing high-altitude precision bombing strategy. Bombing from 30,000 feet delivered less than 5% accuracy, disrupted by a meteorological force newly discovered by U.S. airmen, the jet stream, with winds up to 250 miles per hour, pushing bombs miles off target. Even the B-29s themselves, technological marvels costing $639,000 each, about $11 million today, were plagued by engine issues. The powerful Ryder 3350 engines frequently overheated and caught fire during long climbs. By January 1945, mechanical failures had destroyed more B-29s than the Japanese military had. But Japan's first true shock did not come from altitude or engines, it came from American chemistry. At Harvard University, Dr. Louis Fieser and his team had been working since 1942 on a weapon tailored specifically for Japan's wooden cities. Traditional incendiaries, magnesium and thermite, burned fiercely but too briefly. Fieser developed something completely different, a sticky gasoline-based gel that clung to whatever it touched and burned for up to half an hour. The formula was deceptively simple: aluminum salts of naphthenic and palmitic acids mixed with gasoline. They combined the names Na from naphthenic and Palm from palmitic to create napalm. The M69 incendiary system had actually begun development even earlier, October 1941, 2 months before Pearl Harbor, showing that U.S. war planners were already preparing for the possibility of burning Japanese cities. The first true revelation of American intent came not over Japan, but in the Utah desert. At the Dugway Proving Ground, the U.S. built exact replicas of Japanese neighborhoods, tatami floors, paper shoji doors, identical wooden framing, designed by Jewish refugee architect Eric Mendelsohn to mirror Tokyo construction perfectly. Tests in 1943 produced results that would have horrified Japanese leaders. A single 500 pounds M69 cluster could ignite fires over 2,500 square feet. Napalm splattered on impact, throwing burning gel up to 100 feet, and most devastating, water could not extinguish it. The burning gel would simply float on water and continue burning, making traditional Japanese firefighting methods useless. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McNamara, then a statistical analyst for the Army Air Forces, calculated that 68 Japanese cities could be completely destroyed with the B-29 force available. His analysis presented to Lame in February 1945 showed that switching from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude incendiary attacks could increase destruction efficiency by 500%. The Japanese, meanwhile, remained dangerously ignorant of these preparations. Colonel Shigeru Nakajima, head of Tokyo's air defense, would later admit, "We believed the Americans would continue high-altitude daylight precision bombing as they had in Europe." The possibility of low-altitude night incendiary raids was never seriously considered. February 25, 1945, Tokyo. The first major incendiary test arrived without warning. 231 B-29s dropped 453 tons of incendiaries on a 1 square mile section of Tokyo, destroying 28,000 buildings and killing 3,000 people. This was merely Lane's experiment testing whether Japanese air defenses could handle low-altitude attacks. Police photographer Koyo Ishiawa, documenting the damage the next morning, noticed something unprecedented. The fires had not simply burned buildings. They had created their own wind systems. Immense incandescent vortices rose in several places, he recorded, sucking whole blocks of houses into a maelstrom of fire. The Japanese military response revealed fatal misconceptions. General Masakazu Kawab, deputy chief of the Army General Staff, dismissed the raid as harassment. He assured Emperor Hirohito that Tokyo's 8,000 firefighters organized into neighborhood brigades could handle any American incendiary attack. The government distributed wooden buckets and sand to civilians, conducting daily drills where housewives practiced beating out flames with wet mops. But nothing prepared them for the intelligence network that guided American targeting. Japanese Americans recruited from internment camps were translating captured documents, identifying industrial targets dispersed among residential areas. Sergeant Ben Kuroki, who flew 58 combat missions despite his family being interned, later revealed, "We knew exactly where every small factory was, hidden, every workshop in someone's home." The Japanese thought dispersal would protect their industry. Instead, it gave Lame the justification to burn entire cities. March 9, 1945. 5:35 p.m. Guam's Northfield. The first B-29, nicknamed Dauntless Doi, began its takeoff roll. Over the next 2 hours and 45 minutes, 325 superfortresses would launch from 3 islands, Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, converging on Tokyo in the largest raid ever assembled. Lame had made 3 radical decisions that transformed the mission. First, all defensive guns except tail positions were removed along with their gunners and ammunition. Second, the bombers would attack at night between 5,000 and 7,000 feet below effective radar detection and heavy anti-aircraft guns. Third, each plane would carry 40 cluster bombs containing 1,520 individual M69 incendiary bomblets, double the normal bomb load. The lead Pathfinder aircraft, arriving over Tokyo at 12:08 a.m. on March 10, marked the target area with napalm bombs and a giant flaming X. The main force followed, dropping their incendiaries in a calculated pattern designed to create a ring of fire that would trap residents inside. Tailgunner Sergeant James C.R. watched the first bomb's impact. At first, it looked like silver snow falling. Then each one erupted into a pool of fire about 10 feet across. Within minutes, thousands of these pools merged into rivers of fire flowing through the streets. The weather conditions, 45 to 67 miles per hour surface winds from the southwest, proved catastrophic for Tokyo's residents. These natural winds, combined with the firestorm's convection currents, created what pilots described as solid sheets of flame leaping 300 feet into the air. As the bombers passed over Tokyo Bay, their crews witnessed something that defied their understanding of physics. The fires were creating their own weather system, a phenomenon scientists would later term a firestorm. Superheated air rose so violently that it created hurricane-force winds at ground level, sucking oxygen from shelters and feeding the flames with fresh air. B-29 pilot Robert Morgan, who had previously flown the famous Memphis Belle in Europe, recorded, at 5,000 feet, the thermal updrafts were so violent they threw our 140,000 pounds bomber around like a leaf. The turbulence was worse than any anti-aircraft fire I experienced over Germany. The target area, the Shitamachi district, contained not only dense residential housing, but also thousands of small workshops that produced components for Japan's war industry. The government had deliberately dispersed production after the 1942 Doolittle raid, believing this would protect it from American bombing. Instead, This dispersion gave Lame the rationale to target entire residential districts. Radio operator Staff Sergeant Carl Barold monitored Japanese civilian defense frequencies. At first, there was organized chatter. Fire brigades coordinating responses. Within 30 minutes, it turned to panic, then screaming, then silence. One by one, the radio stations went dead. The firestorm's intensity exceeded all predictions. Temperatures reached 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit in the fire's core, hot enough to melt glass and aluminum. The Sumida River, which residents fled to for safety, began to boil. Asphalt streets liquefied, trapping those attempting to flee. By 2:30 a.m., 2.5 hours into the raid, the destruction had achieved a scale that shattered Japanese understanding of warfare. Police records later documented attempts to coordinate evacuation that revealed the complete inadequacy of preparations. One district commander reported, "We had drilled for conventional fires that spread building to building. This was different. The fire was everywhere simultaneously. It fell from the sky, flowed through streets like water, jumped across fire risks we thought were impossible." The most devastating blow to Japanese assumptions came from the behavior of the M69 bomblets themselves. Each one upon impact shot burning napalm up to 100 feet horizontally, coating everything in sticky fire that water couldn't extinguish. Firefighters watched in horror as their hoses merely spread the burning gel. Dr. Kubota Shigenori, head of a rescue squad, recorded observations that challenged basic physics as Japanese understood it. The heat was so intense that people burst into flames without being touched by fire. Their clothes would suddenly ignite from radiant heat. We saw families fleeing thinking they had escaped only to combust spontaneously 50 m from the flames. The American bombers meanwhile experienced their own revelation. Bombardier Lieutenant John Sauer watched his instruments. The thermal column was so powerful it registered on our altimeter. We were supposedly at 5,000 feet, but the heat was pushing us up to 7,000, even 8,000 feet. The entire city had become a blast furnace. As dawn broke on March 10, the scale of destruction defied comprehension. Reconnaissance photos taken by F-13 aircraft, modified B-29s, showed 15.8 square miles of Tokyo had been incinerated. The images revealed something that stunned American photo interpreters. Entire districts had simply vanished. Not damaged, not burned, but completely erased from existence. Japanese police reports captured after the war documented the immediate toll. 83,793 confirmed dead, though authorities admitted many bodies had been completely consumed by fire. 267,171 buildings destroyed, over 1 million homeless. But these statistics failed to capture the psychological impact. 16-year-old Tsuchiya Masako, who survived by submerging herself in a water tank until the fire passed, emerged to find her entire neighborhood gone. There were no landmarks, no streets, just gray ash as far as I could see. I couldn't find where my house had been. Everyone I knew was dead or missing. The breakdown of civil authority was immediate and complete. Tokyo's fire department, which had confidently assured citizens they could handle any air raid, ceased to exist as an organized force within 2 hours. Of 8,000 firefighters, over 1,000 died in the first night, with hundreds more severely burned. Their equipment, mostly hand-drawn pumps and wooden ladders, proved utterly useless against napalm. In the days following March 10, Tokyo faced a crisis that exposed the fragility of Japanese preparations. The government had no contingency plans for casualties on this scale. Makeshift morgues were established in schools, temples, and parks. Bodies were stacked in ways that shocked even hardened officials awaiting mass cremation. The psychological impact on survivors proved as devastating as physical destruction. Yoshiko Hashimoto, searching for her mother among thousands of corpses, described scenes that challenged human comprehension. The bodies were all black, shrunken to the size of children. You couldn't tell men from women, adults from children. Some were fused together in embraces, families who died holding each other. The government's response revealed its complete unpreparedness. Emperor Hirohito touring the destroyed areas on March 18 was visibly shaken. His aide Marquito recorded, "His Majesty stood silent for a long time, then said, 'Tokyo has become a burned field. The capital of the empire has become a burned field.'" Yet even this devastation failed to immediately change Japanese military strategy. The government ordered increased production of bamboo spears for civilians to repel the anticipated American invasion while suppressing information about the raid's true scale. Newspapers were forbidden to publish casualty figures or photographs of the destruction. The systematic destruction of Japan's cities followed a carefully planned schedule. On March 11, even as Tokyo still burned, 285 B-29s struck Nagoya, center of Japan's aircraft industry. The Mitsubishi engine plant, which produced 40% of Japan's aircraft engines, took direct hits from 1,938 tons of incendiaries. Factory worker Tanaka Hidoshi watched from a hillside as his workplace vanished. The Americans dropped fire in perfect patterns like farmers planting rice. Each bomb created a square of fire, and the squares merged into an ocean of flame. In 20 minutes, factories that took years to build were gone. The campaign's industrial logic was relentless. Osaka, Japan's second-largest city and center of textile production, received 274 B-29s on March 13. The raiders destroyed 8.1 square miles, eliminating 134 war factories. Kobe, the major port and shipbuilding center, lost 7 square miles on March 16, including the Kawasaki submarine yards and aircraft factories. The precision of American target selection revealed an intelligence network the Japanese hadn't imagined. Small workshops hidden in residential areas, unmarked factories and converted schools, even individual homes where families assembled aircraft components, all were systematically destroyed. Post-war investigations revealed that American intelligence, aided by pre-war business records and Japanese-American translators, had mapped Japan's entire industrial infrastructure. By April 1945, the cumulative impact of firebombing was producing what Japanese military psychiatrists termed spiritual collapse among the civilian population. Secret police reports discovered after the war documented increasing defeatism, with citizens openly questioning whether the emperor was divine if he couldn't protect them from American bombs. Lieutenant General Noru Tazoi, the officer overseeing Japan's homeland air defenses, conceded during a post-war interrogation that after the March firebombing assaults, he realized victory was impossible. The Americans, he admitted, possessed the capability to obliterate any city whenever they chose, and Japan had no means to counter nighttime incendiary strikes. An unexpected source delivered the most severe blow to Japanese morale: American warning leaflets dropped prior to the raids. Initially dismissed as psychological warfare, these notices soon began accurately identifying which cities were about to be wiped out. The emotional impact of knowing destruction was imminent yet having no power to stop it was devastating. Dr. Masao Maruyama, a political theorist who endured the attacks, later wrote, "The leaflets shattered our belief in heroic death. This was not combat. It was scheduled elimination. The Americans declared they would burn our cities, and then they did exactly that. We were not defeated, we were processed." The scale of the expanding bombing campaign exceeded anything the Japanese population could comprehend. Following the initial March firestorm that erased 32 square miles in 10 days, General LeMay methodically moved on to Japan's remaining urban centers. By May, with the major cities already devastated, the mission shifted to medium-sized population centers, 58 cities ranging from 60,000 to 350,000 residents. On May 29, a force of 517 B-29s, escorted by 101 P-51 Mustangs flying from the newly secured island of Iwo Jima, attacked Yokohama in broad daylight. The escort fighters introduced a new psychological shock: American fighter aircraft operating directly over Japan, something civilians had been assured was impossible. With fighter cover, B-29s could strike targets by day without fear of interception. The arithmetic of devastation grew beyond Japan's capacity to react. In May alone, American bombers obliterated 94 square miles of urban terrain. June saw an additional 89 square miles burned. By July, mission planners were running out of untouched targets, prompting repeated attacks on cities already destroyed to prevent reconstruction. The August 1, 1945 assault showcased American industrial strength at its height: 836 B-29s striking 4 cities at once, the largest single raid of the war. Hakioji, home to 80,000 people west of Tokyo, suffered 80% destruction in one night. Toyama, a key aluminum manufacturing center, was devastated to 99.5%, the most complete destruction of any city throughout the conflict. Throughout the campaign, personal accounts revealed the human consequences of industrial-scale warfare. Katsumoto Sato, who was 12 during the Tokyo firebombing, devoted his life to collecting survivor testimonies. By 2002, he had assembled more than 1,000 first-hand narratives, preserving memories overlooked by official histories. One of the most vivid came from Haruyo Nihi, who was 8 during the March 10 inferno. While fleeing through the smoke and chaos, she was separated from her family. The wind was so fierce it lifted people off the ground, she recalled. I saw a woman carrying a baby suddenly ignite. The child screamed, then both turned silent, only black shapes falling forward. Haruyo lived only because her father, unrecognizable to her in the darkness, shielded her with his own body as burning fragments rained down. They survived because other bodies piled above them absorbed the heat. I could hear people praying, screaming, then only silence. When we crawled out at sunrise, our skin was coated in the melted fat of those who had protected us. The emotional scars endured long after the flames died. Shizuyo Takuchi, 14 during the raids, described the lingering trauma. For years, striking a match made my hands tremble. The smell of grilled meat made me sick. A bright orange sunset could send me into a panic. We lived through that night, but a part of us never left it. Japan's medical system proved utterly inadequate for the catastrophe. Dr. Shigenori Kubota, leading a rescue unit that night, encountered injuries beyond anything physicians had been trained to treat. We saw victims whose lungs were seared from inhaling superheated air. They were alive but unable to breathe. Others had literally baked inside underground shelters when temperatures climbed above 400 degrees. Nothing in our experience prepared us for this. The few hospitals that remained intact were inundated almost instantly. Supplies vanished within hours. Burn wards designed for dozens were overwhelmed with thousands. Medical teams were forced into brutal, battlefield-style triage, treating only those who had a chance to live and leaving others to die. Nurse Takahashi Aiko of Tokyo Imperial University Hospital recorded, "We exhausted our morphine in the first hour, our bandages in the second. By morning, we were tearing our uniforms into strips for dressings." The screaming never ceased. When I finally collapsed after 2 days without sleep, I could still hear the cries in my dreams. The public health crisis extended beyond immediate casualties. With water systems destroyed and bodies decomposing in the ruins, disease outbreaks threatened survivors. Typhoid, dysentery, and respiratory infections spread rapidly through overcrowded refugee centers. The government focused on maintaining military readiness, allocated minimal resources to civilian medical care. Behind the bombing campaign lay an intelligence operation of unprecedented scope. The Joint Target Group in Washington had spent 2 years analyzing Japan's urban infrastructure using pre-war insurance maps, tourist guides, and business directories. They knew the location of every significant factory, the layout of every major city, even the construction materials of different neighborhoods. Japanese-American linguists recruited from internment camps provided crucial intelligence. Sergeant Roy Matsumoto, whose family was imprisoned at Jerome, Arkansas while he served in Burma, later revealed, "We translated captured documents showing where factories had relocated." A diary from a dead soldier might mention his sister working at a hidden aircraft parts shop. Every piece of information went into target folders. The Office of Strategic Services, OSS, had agents reporting from neutral countries, tracking Japanese industrial production through shipping manifests and trade documents. Swedish businessman Widar Bag, secretly working for American intelligence, provided detailed reports on Japanese synthetic oil production that guided target selection. Most remarkably, American coderickers were reading Japanese military communications throughout the campaign. They knew which cities had functioning air defenses, where night fighters were stationed, even when fuel shortages grounded interceptors. This intelligence allowed Lame to route bombers around defenses and strike when Japanese fighters couldn't respond. Meteorology became a weapon as devastating as napalm itself. American weather officers had discovered they could predict optimal firestorm conditions, low humidity, high winds, and clear skies. They timed raids to coincide with weather patterns that would maximize fire spread. The March 10 Tokyo raid succeeded partly because meteorologists predicted the strong southwestern winds that drove the firestorm. Captain Robert Nelson, chief weather officer for 21st Bomber Command, later explained, We knew those winds would turn individual fires into a single conflagration. We literally weaponized the weather. Japanese authorities lacking sophisticated meteorological services couldn't predict when conditions favored firestorm formation. They maintained the same civil defense procedures regardless of weather, not understanding that certain conditions made firefighting impossible. The Americans even manipulated weather perceptions. They deliberately conducted nuisance raids during poor weather, forcing Japanese defenders to maintain alerts during storms. Then, when perfect firestorm conditions arose, defenses were exhausted from false alarms. By July 1945, American firebombing had achieved its strategic objective: the complete collapse of Japanese civilian morale and industrial capacity. Secret police reports showed only 32% of civilians believed Japan could achieve anything resembling victory. War production had fallen to 15% of 1944 levels. Over 8.5 million people were homeless, living in makeshift shelters or fleeing to the countryside. The nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, while shocking in their novelty, killed fewer people than the firebombing campaign. Hiroshima's death toll of 146,000 and Nagasaki's 80,000 combined were less than the 330,000 to 900,000 killed by conventional bombing. Yet, it was the combination, the demonstration that America possessed both unlimited conventional destructive capacity and revolutionary new weapons that finally convinced Emperor Hirohito to surrender. In his August 15, 1945 surrender broadcast, Hirohito specifically referenced a new and most cruel bomb. But privately, he had been more influenced by the systematic destruction of Japan's cities. According to his aide Marquito's diary, His Majesty said the American firebombing showed they could destroy Japan completely without invading. The atomic bomb simply made the destruction faster. The B-29 campaign represented the largest industrial undertaking in history to that point. The program cost $3 billion, equivalent to $50 billion today, more than the Manhattan Project. Boeing, Bell, Martin, and Fisher built 3,970 B-29s at 4 massive plants, each one containing 55,000 manufactured parts plus 8,000 additional purchased items. Each bomber required 2,000 engineering drawings and 100,000 hours of labor to construct. The Wright RR 3350 engines, despite their problems, represented the pinnacle of piston engine technology. 18 cylinders producing 2,200 horsepower each, giving the B-29 a range of 3,250 miles with a 20,000 pounds bomb load. The logistical achievement matched the industrial. Building airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam required moving 11 million cubic yards of earth and coral. Northfield on Tinian became the world's largest airport with 6 8,500-foot runways handling 269 B-29s. Engineers installed 15,000 miles of communications wire and built fuel farms holding 16 million gallons of aviation gasoline. The very existence of this infrastructure in the middle of the Pacific Ocean demonstrated American capabilities beyond Japanese comprehension. Admiral Sue Toyota later admitted, "We couldn't build a single adequate airfield on islands we had held for decades." The Americans built dozens on islands they had just captured while still fighting. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki must be understood within the context of the firebombing campaign. By August 1945, 66 Japanese cities had been substantially destroyed. The nuclear weapons, while revolutionary in their physics, were evolutionary in their strategic impact. Colonel Paul Tibbets, who piloted the Enola Gay, had previously participated in conventional raids. He later observed the atomic bomb was cleaner, quicker, but not necessarily more destructive than fire raids. Tokyo on March 10 looked worse than Hiroshima after August 6. The Japanese military's initial response to Hiroshima reveals their numbed acceptance of city-scale destruction. Many leaders assumed it was simply another firebombing until radiation effects became apparent. General Kauabe's first reaction was relief that only one plane was involved, meaning America couldn't have many such weapons. What the atomic bombs provided was efficiency. The destruction of an entire city with a single aircraft rather than hundreds. This efficiency, combined with the radiation effects that killed survivors weeks later, finally convinced Japanese hardliners that continued resistance was futile. The decision to surrender debated in the Supreme Council for the direction of the war was fundamentally shaped by the firebombing campaign. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yanai argued, "The B-29s have already destroyed most of our cities. The atomic bomb simply makes the destruction more efficient. We cannot defend against either. War Minister General Kirichika Anami, the strongest opponent of surrender, had received reports that America had sufficient incendiaries to destroy every city and town in Japan. His intelligence staff calculated that at current production rates, the Americans could maintain the bombing campaign indefinitely. The most influential voice was Prince Fumamaru Kono, who told Emperor Hirohito, "The American bombing has already destroyed Japan's ability to wage war. Continuing means not defeat but annihilation. Every week of delay means another city erased." On August 10, 1945, during the climactic Imperial Conference, Hirohito made his decision. "I cannot bear to see my innocent people suffer any longer. Continuing the war means only that more Japanese blood will be shed." When American occupation forces entered Japan in September 1945, they discovered the true extent of destruction. General Douglas MacArthur's staff found that 40% of Japan's urban area had been destroyed. In the 66 targeted cities, 2.5 million buildings had been razed. Industrial production had fallen to less than 10% of capacity. The human toll became clearer through Japanese records. Official counts listed 330,000 dead from conventional bombing, but municipal records suggested deaths between 500,000 and 900,000. Millions more suffered permanent injuries, burns, respiratory damage from smoke inhalation, psychological trauma that would last lifetimes. American engineers surveying the damage were shocked by their own success. Colonel John Montgomery, inspecting Tokyo, wrote, "There are areas of 8 to 10 square miles where absolutely nothing remains. Not rubble, not foundations, just gray ash. It looks like the surface of the moon." The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted immediately after surrender, concluded that Japan would have surrendered by November 1945 without atomic bombs or invasion based solely on the conventional bombing campaign and naval blockade. In the decades after the war, survivors of the firebombing organized to preserve their experiences. Katsumoto Sato established the Center of the Tokyo Raids and War Damages in 2002, creating an archive of over 3,000 survivor testimonies. His work revealed stories official histories had ignored. Masako Yamada, who lost her entire family on March 10, 1945, spent 40 years documenting the names of victims in her neighborhood. Her handwritten lists, now preserved in the Tokyo Peace Museum, contain 3,847 names, people whose existence would otherwise be forgotten. Haruyo Nihei, the child who survived under corpses, became a peace educator, speaking to over 100,000 students about her experience. Her message was consistent. War is not statistics or strategies. War is a child watching her mother burn alive and being unable to help. The testimonies reveal permanent psychological damage. Survivors reported lifelong phobias of fire, inability to attend fireworks displays, panic attacks triggered by air raid sirens used for fire drills. Many never spoke of their experiences until decades later, the trauma too profound for words. The M69 incendiary bomb represented a masterpiece of destructive engineering. Each bomblet contained 2.6 pounds of napalm gel and a 20 inches hexagonal steel pipe. The genius lay in the delivery mechanism. 38 bomblets packed in an E-46 cluster that opened at 2,000 feet, scattering the M69s over a wide area. Upon impact, a 3 to 5 second delay fuse ignited white phosphorus, which shot the napalm gel through the tail of the bomb. The gel, heated to 800 to 1,200 degrees Celsius, sprayed in a 100-foot stream, coating everything it touched. The napalm would burn for 15 to 30 minutes, far longer than conventional incendiaries. Testing at Dugway Proving Ground had perfected the formula. Scientists discovered that adding polystyrene to the napalm created a substance that stuck more effectively to surfaces. They tested different concentrations until achieving the optimal balance between adherence and spread. The cluster bomb pattern was mathematically calculated for maximum coverage. Operations researchers determined that 38 bomblets per cluster dropped in specific patterns would create overlapping fire zones that would merge into a general conflagration within 20 minutes. Behind every B-29 raid lay an industrial achievement that dwarfed Japan's entire war production. The Boeing plant in Wichita covered 1.6 million square feet, employing 29,000 workers on 3 shifts. At peak production, they completed one B-29 every 90 minutes. The supply chain stretched across America. Engines from Wright Aeronautical in New Jersey, propellers from Hamilton Standard in Connecticut, instruments from Sperry Corporation in New York, gun turrets from General Electric. Each component required its own vast production infrastructure. The aluminum alone told the story of American industrial might. Each B-29 required 60,000 pounds of aluminum. The Alcoa plant in Tennessee, powered by TVA electricity, produced more aluminum in a month than Japan managed in a year. The electricity required for aluminum production exceeded Japan's entire national power generation. The training pipeline matched the industrial effort. By 1945, America was graduating 1,000 B-29 crew members monthly from training bases in Kansas, Nebraska, and New Mexico. Each crew underwent 6 months of training, including 400 hours of flight time before deployment to the Pacific. The firebombing campaign revolutionized strategic bombing doctrine. Previous theories developed by Italian General Julio Duet and American General Billy Mitchell had emphasized precision bombing of specific targets. Lane's campaign proved that area destruction could be more effective than precision, particularly against dispersed industry. The campaign validated economist John Kenneth Galbraith's theory of dehousing that destroying workers' homes was more effective than bombing factories. Workers without shelter, food, or transportation couldn't maintain production even if factories survived. Post-war analysis revealed the campaign's strategic brilliance. By destroying urban areas, the bombing forced Japan to evacuate 8.5 million people to the countryside, creating a refugee crisis that consumed resources needed for war production. Transportation systems collapsed under the burden of moving refugees, preventing raw materials from reaching surviving factories. The psychological strategy proved equally sophisticated. By announcing targets in advance through leaflets, the Americans created panic migrations that disrupted production more than the actual bombing. Workers fled threatened cities, abandoning their posts days before raids occurred. General Curtis Lane's decision to switch from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude area bombing represented one of the war's most consequential command decisions. On March 7, 1945, he made the choice unilaterally, not even informing his superior General Henry Arnold until after the first raid. Lane later wrote, "I woke up at 2 a.m. with the solution. Strip the guns, fly low at night, carry only incendiaries." It violated everything we'd been taught, but the math was undeniable. We could destroy Japan's cities completely, or we could fail trying to hit specific targets. The personal burden weighed heavily. Lane expected court-martial if the raid failed. He personally briefed every crew, explaining that he was ordering them to fly defenseless into the enemy's capital. "If it doesn't work, send me home in chains," he told his staff. The success vindicated his judgment, but Lane never glorified the decision. In his memoirs, he wrote, "We knew we were going to kill a lot of women and kids. But if the war had continued, millions more would have died in an invasion." It was simple arithmetic, horrible, necessary arithmetic. The firebombing fundamentally altered Japanese culture and society. The concept of mujo, impermanence, took on new meaning as entire cities vanished overnight. Traditional architecture evolved over centuries proved fatally vulnerable to modern warfare. Post-war urban planning reflected firebombing trauma. Cities were rebuilt with wide boulevards that could serve as fire reeks. Building codes mandated concrete construction. Parks were designed as evacuation areas. Modern Tokyo's layout with its seemingly random open spaces directly results from firebombing experience. The Japanese language itself changed. New words entered common usage. Napalm dan napalm bomb, Shurdan incendiary bomb. Higashisha bombing victim. The phrase Yukin Noara burned field became synonymous with total destruction. Literature and cinema grappled with the experience for decades. Novelist Kobo Abe, who witnessed bombing in Manchuria, wrote surrealist works exploring themes of identity loss and urban destruction. Director Akira Kurosawa's post-war films often featured fire as a destructive force reflecting national trauma. The legality of the firebombing campaign remains debated among international law scholars. The 1907 HEG Convention prohibited bombing undefended cities, but Japan's cities contained military targets and air defenses, technically making them legitimate targets. The principle of proportionality, that civilian casualties must not be excessive relative to military advantage, was poorly defined in 1945. American planners argued that destroying dispersed war industry justified area bombing. Critics contended that deliberately creating firestorms to maximize civilian casualties violated laws of war. Robert McNamara, who helped plan the campaign as a statistical analyst, later reflected, "Lame said if we'd lost the war, we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals." And I think he's right. We were behaving as war criminals. But what makes it immoral if you lose and not immoral if you win? The Nuremberg and Tokyo trials established new precedents for war crimes, but didn't address Allied bombing. The 1949 Geneva Conventions attempted to clarify protections for civilians, largely in response to World War II's area bombing campaigns. How the firebombing is remembered remains contested between Japan and America. In Japan, the raids are memorialized as victimization with peace museums in Tokyo, Osaka, and other cities displaying melted artifacts and survivor testimonies. March 10th is observed as Tokyo Peace Day. American memory largely forgot the firebombing, overshadowed by the atomic bomb's dramatic singularity. Military histories emphasize the campaign's strategic success in ending the war without invasion. The moral questions that tormented McNamara rarely enter public discourse. Survivors like Katsumoto Saotoi fought for recognition, arguing the firebombing's victims deserve the same acknowledgement as atomic bomb survivors. The Japanese government long resisted, not wanting to complicate its victim narrative or anger its American ally. Recent scholarship has attempted balanced assessment. Richard Frank's downfall argues the bombing saved millions of lives by preventing invasion. Mark Selden's The Firebombings of Tokyo and Japan emphasizes the deliberate targeting of civilians. The debate continues without resolution. The firebombing campaign's technological innovations influenced warfare for generations. Napalm, perfected for Japan, became a standard weapon used extensively in Korea and Vietnam. The cluster bomb concept evolved into modern precision-guided munitions. The operational research methods developed to plan raids, statistical analysis, probability calculations, systems optimization became standard military practice. McNamara later applied these same analytical methods as Secretary of Defense with controversial results in Vietnam. Weather prediction for military operations advanced significantly. The techniques developed to predict firestorm conditions contributed to modern meteorological science. Understanding of fire behavior, urban configuration patterns and thermal effects influenced urban planning and fire safety regulations worldwide. The B-29 itself, despite its Pacific War success, quickly became obsolete in the jet age. But the industrial mobilization required to produce it demonstrated American capacity for technological achievement, setting the stage for the aerospace industry and space program. Final casualty figures from the firebombing campaign remain disputed, but documented evidence provides minimum numbers. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey counted 330,000 dead and 476,000 injured from conventional bombing. Japanese government statistics suggested 500,000 dead. Some historians estimate up to 900,000 deaths when including delayed mortality from burns, smoke inhalation, and disease. Beyond deaths, the campaign created 8.5 million refugees, 30% of Japan's urban population. 2.5 million buildings were destroyed. Economic losses exceeded 25% of national wealth. Industrial production fell to 10% of capacity. The psychological toll proved immeasurable. Dr. Masahiro Yamamoto's post-war study of 10,000 survivors found 73% suffered chronic anxiety, 61% reported recurring nightmares, and 44% showed symptoms of what would now be diagnosed as PTSD. These traumas passed to subsequent generations through family dynamics and cultural memory. Medical consequences persisted for decades. Survivors showed elevated rates of respiratory disease from smoke inhalation, chronic pain from burn injuries, and increased cancer incidence possibly related to toxic exposures. The Japanese government provided no comprehensive medical care for firebombing survivors, unlike atomic bomb victims who received special medical benefits. Curtis Lane never apologized for the firebombing, but acknowledged its moral weight. In his autobiography, he wrote, "Every soldier thinks something of the moral aspects of what he is doing, but all war is immoral, and if you let that bother you, you're not a good soldier." His deputy, Brigadier General Thomas Power, was more reflective. "We killed more Japanese civilians in the firebombing than died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. We knew what we were doing. The idea was to kill enough people that Japan would surrender. It worked, but at what cost to our humanity? Japanese perspectives evolved over decades. Initially, survivors focused on victimization. Later, some acknowledged Japan's aggression had invited retaliation. Sito Katsumoto argued for universal lessons. The firebombing shows what modern war means: the complete destruction of civilian society. This is why we must never have another war. American airmen who participated showed varying responses. Some maintained the bombing was necessary to end the war. Others struggled with guilt. Tail gunner Joseph Majeski never spoke of his missions until near death. "I saw the fires we set. I knew people were dying down there. Women, kids. You do what you have to in war, but it stays with you." The firebombing of Japan represented the culmination of strategic bombing theory, industrial warfare, and technological innovation. In 9 months, American forces dropped 158,000 tons of bombs, destroying 175 square miles of urban area across 66 cities. The campaign killed more Japanese civilians than 2 years of ground combat in the Pacific. The operation succeeded through meticulous planning, overwhelming industrial capacity, and radical tactical innovation. Lane's decision to abandon doctrine, stripping defensive weapons, flying at low altitude, doubled bombing effectiveness overnight. The development of napalm created a weapon perfectly suited to Japan's wooden cities. Yet success came through deliberately targeting civilians. The dispersal of Japanese industry provided rationale, but not moral justification for burning entire residential districts. The campaign's architects knew they were killing non-combatants en masse and proceeded anyway, calculating that civilian deaths would force surrender. The survivors' testimonies. Haruyo Nihi pulled from under corpses. Yoshiko Hashimoto finding her mother's charred body. Katsumoto Saito running through seas of flame. Humanized statistics that numb comprehension. Their accounts preserve the reality of industrial warfare. Not abstract strategy, but children watching parents burn alive. Modern Tokyo bears hidden scars of the firebombing. Parks and boulevards mark former fire zones. Memorials list names of neighborhoods that vanished completely. Elderly survivors still flinch at sirens, avoid grilled food, fear orange sunsets. The trauma embedded itself in Japanese culture, shaping post-war pacifism and alliance with former enemies. The strategic success, forcing surrender without invasion, must be weighed against moral costs. The campaign proved area bombing could destroy nations, but raised questions about limits in warfare. McNamara's late-life acknowledgement, "We acted like war criminals," captures the unresolved conflict between strategic necessity and basic human morality. The firebombing campaign remains the most devastating use of non-nuclear weapons ever directed at urban centers. It revealed both the enormous power of American industry and the grim transformation of warfare into deliberate mass slaughter. The infernos that consumed Japanese cities stripped away any illusions about what modern conflict truly represents: not battles between soldiers, but the systematic obliteration of entire populations. Ultimately, Japan never anticipated that American napalm would ignite the very rain, produce temperatures capable of boiling rivers, generate fire-driven cyclones, or burn oxygen out of underground shelters. They had prepared for a traditional war and instead confronted the near-total erasure of their cities by an opponent whose industrial strength defied imagination. The legacy of these raids remains fiercely debated, with moral questions still unresolved. Yet the voices of survivors, preserved across decades, ensure that the human suffering is not forgotten. As Katsumoto Sayatama wrote before his passing, "I don't tell these stories for pity, but as a warning. This is what war becomes when technology exists only to destroy. May such fires never be unleashed again." Statistics record one narrative: 330,000 to 900,000 dead, 66 cities burned, 8.5 million left without homes. Survivor accounts tell another: children orphaned in moments, families erased, neighborhoods wiped out completely. Together, they capture the moment when warfare crossed into a new and horrifying realm, the ability to annihilate entire civilizations from the sky, turning centuries of culture into ash in a single night. That capability, first demonstrated over Tokyo on March 10, 1945, permanently reshaped the nature of war and humanity's power to destroy. The flames that devoured Japan's cities illuminated the path to the nuclear age, where entire nations can vanish with a single decision. Japan saw its assumptions incinerated by overwhelming fire that fell like rain, moved like water, and consumed everything until cities simply disappeared.